Hey, welcome to the Open House Show. We've got a great spring break episode for you today. We've got Hans Mundahl. He's coming from the Enrollment Management Association. He's the Director of Professional Development. They just released their 2021 The Ride to Independent Schools report. It's a parent's perspective. I'm very interested to dive into a lot of the insights that they found through here. So without further ado, during this busy season, let's bring him on. Hans, how are you, sir?
Hey, Jesse. So good. How about yourself?
I can't complain. Can't complain. Sunny Florida. Spring is here. The pollen's out. I try to stay indoors as much as possible for the next couple of weeks. So.
Oh, we got a little snow shower this morning. So, that's spring in New Hampshire. Don't like the weather. Wait 5 minutes. It's going to change.
Oh, man. That's incredible. Well, I'm excited for the show today. I really appreciate you taking the time. I know you guys over there are extremely busy. So, without further ado, introduce yourself to the audience. Tell us a little bit about your journey. I know you've gone through a lot of different positions in the school world, and now you're at EMA. So, kind of give us a rundown about your journey.
You bet. You bet. I started as an educator in the late 90s. I was actually an outward bound instructor, taking kids out sailing in Boston Harbor, paddling and hiking in the White Mountains. And then I started working at an independent school. My first role was actually as the outdoor program director. So I ran the outdoor program at an independent school, transitioned from there into faculty, and did just about everything you can do at an independent school from the 90s till today. I've been a teacher, a house parent, an advisor. I worked in admissions, worked in the communications department. I've been a trustee. I've even been a head of school at a progressive K day school here in central New Hampshire. The only thing I have never done, Jesse, is coached a field sport. So JV soccer, still in my future.
You're always a spectator. We'll have to cross that one off the list for you.
Definitely. JV soccer is about what I'm qualified for. So maybe if I have a good coach.
Fair enough. You got to get the assistant coach on there with you.
100%.
Tell us a little bit about EMA. I know our audience should be quite familiar with you guys, but outside of this report, I know there's a lot that attend, the conference, the annual conference that goes on. But tell us a little bit more about how they're able to, help enrollment managers throughout the country.
You bet. So the Enrollment Management Association, we're a professional association serving about 1,300 schools in the United States, Canada, and around the world. We primarily serve the enrollment director at those schools, although for a school to have enrollment success, the enrollment director, head, board, faculty, really it's a 360 view. Everybody needs to be on board with enrollment. So that's how we view our role. And we help schools with professional development. We help schools with research like we're going to talk about today. And then, of course, we have a whole suite of tools, including assessments and parent-facing tools that schools can use to really supercharge their enrollment and their careers. So that's a little bit about us.
It's really good to get the insights and to have the reach that you guys have. We'll kind of get to that sample size that a little later. It's factual information. Like it's not just a tiny little piece. Like you're really over encompassing such a wide array of schools, enrollment professionals, parents, on the application side, that you're really able to get insights that people can strategize around, especially, if it pertains to their specific region or school.
Yeah, that's it. We really, because we serve both parents and schools, we're the bridge, right? We can bridge the gap between both groups and help both groups understand one another better. And, that was really the thought behind the Ride to Independent Schools report, is to help bridge the gap for schools, because schools know, what you know, but it's hard to see sometimes that overall cohort, especially when it's changing as much as it really has since the last time we did the report 3 years ago.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And even to add on to that, what you just listed off that plethora of things that you've done in schools. A lot of times admissions directors or other faculty that and administration that stays up to date on these things are doing a lot of those roles all at the same time. So when you talk about even if they had an ambition to look this kind of stuff up and research it, they just don't have the time. They don't have the ability to track all of those things. So making it concise, summarizing things as well as giving raw data, that's a huge help for enrollment managers and in a lot of ways guides them through that process.
Yeah, that's right. Somebody told me recently, like, data is the new oil. And I'm like, yeah, okay, data is interesting, but data, then I'm like, okay, yeah, data is like oil, right? If you refine oil, then it's useful. And I feel like data is the same way. Like data by itself, like you said, it can be in 100 different places, or sometimes it's hard to pull the threads together. Like, oh, I can see this here and this here. But when you refine data to insight, and that's what we've tried to do with the report, is to say, here's what we see, and here's what, how you might approach it. Here's some things you might consider taking a step on based on this information. So we've tried to, try to connect the dots from data to action. And I think that's, that creates insight, right?
Yeah, it's key. I mean, it's true. That's a great point to put. You got to refine the oil in order to make it useful, because it's daunting. Data, and what are you trying to make it say? I can make it say whatever I want if I was, savvy enough. But how do I make that useful? And I think this report did a lot. I know it did for me when I was reading through it this past weekend. So, give us a breakdown. What is this report? What is its purpose? Or what was its, the intended purpose for it? For enrollment managers?
Yeah, so we do the Ride to Independent Schools report every 3 years. This is the third time we've done the report, and it's a survey of parents, finding out what was important to them as they began the enrollment process, what was important to them as they were deciding where to apply, and then ultimately what was important to them as they decided where to enroll. And the goal of this really is to do a couple of things. First of all, to help enrollment leaders understand what parents care about, what they say is important, and then to help enrollment leaders understand what to do with that information going forward. We're releasing the report right now as the yield season is starting, but there's a lot of insights in that report really that should be evergreen. And we did, ask some COVID-related questions. But again, the report surveyed families about their whole journey, and we think that's going to be useful for the next couple of years, and then we'll do it again and find out what's changed and what's remained the same. But this survey was conducted. Can I go ahead and talk about how we kind of did the survey?
Absolutely. Yeah. Sample size, delivery, Jeff, go ahead.
Cool. So we surveyed, it was about 2,800 families last summer. And those were families who had either their child had taken the SSAT, or they had used our standard application online product, or their child had taken the character skill snapshot assessment. They agreed to participate in the survey, and they did that over the summer. And so these were families who had begun the admission process prior to COVID, that started in 2019, and then they finished their enrollment process as COVID was occurring. And again, it's the third time we've done the report, and just fascinating to see what had changed and what had remained the same.
You brought up a good point, and there were some COVID questions on there. Obviously the timing might have made it to where it wasn't as relevant as maybe if it was done, like the next season there. But most of the strategies that I found in there were long-term strategies. You talk about evergreen, like these are things that are, if I were to find an overall theme, it would be the changes from the last one to this one is that generational change that's happening right now. Whether you're talking, Gen Xers and then, following them, millennials, that seemed to be the biggest theme. And a lot of that changed percentages, sometimes, 20 points, 15 points, like big time swings in what was 2017 to now. And I would say overall, that is going to be something you're going to need to try to build an infrastructure for from here on out. It's not just a momentary thing.
No, you're absolutely right. That was right off the top one of the most interesting things, and we've been talking about this for a long time, like, hey, we should see these generational changes, right? And, like to your point earlier, you can make data say what you want. And so I know there's definitely folks who are like, generational cohort's not a thing. That's not so much a thing. And then when you both see the generational swings and then the other data points that we can talk about swinging too, you're like, oh, okay, no, this is a thing. We should expect to see these kinds of changes. And for example, I'll give an example. So, or let me back up. The generational shift that we're talking about since the last time we did the report, the primary age of families who were shopping for independent schools 3 years ago were boomers, and that has fully changed to Gen Xers. So boomers were folks who were born in the 50s and 60s, and the Gen Xers are folks who were born in the 70s and 80s. So that's me. I'm a Gen X parent. And then with the kind of second generation coming up would be the millennials, are the parents shopping for independent schools. And so that just means, Gen Xers care about different things than other generations. And, one of the things that I thought was really interesting was we saw schools' reputation decline in importance for families, particularly early in the process. And that's absolutely that's a Gen X trait. So Gen Xers are going to care less about reputation and more about, do you understand our family? Do you have something that my family needs? Are you going to be the right fit for my child? I love that your prestigious school doesn't really impact my purchasing decision. What can you do for my child? Are you the right fit for us? And so interesting to see that in both the behaviors that they're talking about, as well as in the generation.
Yeah, I like that fact a lot because it does change a lot of things. There, and me on the far end with the millennial side, it's values, it's principles. What do I want my child to be? Obviously, education is the core of anything that you're talking about, and your report showed that it was the number one thing that they were interested in. But again, that reputation had little to do with it. Is this the right fit? Is this child, the social, economics, the diversity issue, social emotional learning. These are all huge pieces that we've all known were kind of, gaining importance in the enrollment process. But then you have a study like this, and it just shows you how much importance that families are weighing on these decisions, and that's huge to me. I particularly liked the contradictory of a lot of things. Parents in one part of the survey say one thing, and then in the other part it's kind of contradictory on how they rank things. So that goes true to the human process of this application.
And I would say in the different stages of the application process, right? I think
that's right.
The way I think about it, the way families begin, and I think one of the key takeaways is that families begin the enrollment process in a different way that they end it, right? So in other words, the things that they care about in the beginning of the process are different from what they care about at the end. And I'll give you an example of that. I mean, one of the takeaways was that, and this gets to the reputation question again a bit, is that families in the beginning of the process tend to care less about college, right? So and remember, we're serving schools who are either K-8 or K-12 or just 9 through 12. So when families begin the process, they might say, "Hey, we're going to rank the importance of college, the college process, lower on a list of possible things in the beginning, and towards the end, we're going to see the importance of college kind of go higher in that list." In other words, when I choose a school to apply to, I might not care about as much about college. When I'm choosing a school to enroll in, I'm going to care more about college. Why is that? Now, I think this gets to that generational thing of outcomes, of value, of showing me that you're worth it to our family, right? And I think that it's interesting how parents care about different things in the beginning or the end. And that, like, for right now, as we're in yield season, right, that just really means we should be emphasizing different things now than we were back in the fall.
Yeah, that funnel's changed a little bit. You're reaching out to them, and what their interests are that you grab their attention with are totally different from what they're deciding at the end to enroll from.
Yes.
Maybe not totally different, but definitely there's correlations that aren't the same. I think in the report they gave an example of financial aid information being important, during the application process, but enrollments, once they're accepted, for them to sign up and enroll, that's when they focus more on, is my student, is my child going to be a good student here? Are they going to be able to prosper emotionally and academically here? So, showing a lot about the student experience towards the end of that, the college acceptance, like you said as well. And it's just an interesting thing to think about, especially when you try to engage with families. Another piece that I found out about it, in this report were how many schools they apply to. I really didn't notice that. I mean, you're talking five schools, sometimes 7 schools that families are applying to and visiting in their shopping. So, they apply, they get accepted to all of them. Who do they choose? That piece of what are you giving them at different parts of the funnel will make a difference in their selection.
Families are applying to more schools than they have in the past, and families are more willing to say that I'm going to make my decision later in the process as well. And so that means for schools that even though you might not be someone's first choice as you enter the process, you might very well be on the back end of the process. And so, to consistently work through demonstrating your value, appealing to both the head and the heart at different times of the decision process, particularly to students. And that was an interesting stat. I think it was 83% of families said that the child was to a great or very great extent the decision maker in where to enroll. So appealing to both the students and the families and the parents, right, could really yield results. And the flip side of that was, I think it was 1 in 7 families said that they dropped a school from their list because the application process was too difficult. So that really speaks to the value of something like a common application service, working with your families, helping them through the process. This process is confusing and complicated sometimes, right? And really help being their partner can ensure that at the very least, your school won't be dropped from the list because it's too difficult, but also could really, I think, serve as a way to demonstrate the way you work with families before they're enrolled at your school, right?
Yeah, and that's a key point. When they drop off because they're not, it's just too much. It's too overwhelming. I mean, I think the process is stressful no matter what. But when you take into account the report showing how strong students change schools from independent day school to independent day school, independent boarding school to independent boarding school, those families have the experience of the independent application. Maybe it varies depending on your school, of course, but they have somewhat of the experience. That 1 in 7. This could be a public school interest. They have no idea about this process and they're overwhelmed with it. And if you're not walking them through that, you could be losing a potential great student, great alumni that becomes a great success and donates his money to your school and helps the endowment, long-term thinking. But walking them through that process, obviously the parent feedback, the personalization that you are giving to the families throughout that process is very key in their decision making too. And I did find it was very funny how much. Well, it wasn't funny. It was interesting how much the students are involved in this process. But what was funny about it was making me think that not only are you going to have a Facebook expert for the parents, but admission staffs are going to have to start doing YouTube stars and TikTok celebrities for the kids.
Totally. I think you're onto something. Or, and that gets at something I think that's it's easy to say, okay, we should have a TikTok account. And if you can't execute that with authenticity, then you probably shouldn't have a TikTok. Skip it. It's fine. And that speaks to, and schools ask me this a lot sometimes. So Hans, should we have a TikTok account, or should we have how many Instagram accounts should we have? And I turn the question around and I ask it a different way: is how much do you understand families? How much do you understand kids? How much do you understand who's your kind of kid, right? Who's the most youest you of a student? And oftentimes they'll say, oh, well, here's the kind of kids who are successful. We have a really good sense of what that is. We have a sense of not only what our families want, but what they believe in, and how what they believe in resonates with what we believe in as an institution. And then I often say, great, then go forth and make a TikTok account. That's great. It's going to be awesome. But if a school is like, well, what do you mean? We know what we do well. And I'll say, yeah, but what role for families, what problem are you solving for families? Right? How does your beliefs align with the family's beliefs? And if those don't line up, it's okay, before you start another Instagram account, before you start a TikTok account, do that work first. Because then that will ensure that you're speaking authentically and appealing to the right kinds of kids and families. Does that make sense?
No, it makes total sense. And I think that, kind of in a nutshell, authenticity is much more important than, trying to haphazardly throw something together in order to reach more. And, your report talked about that. One of the key findings that I found that I thought was very interesting was the little effect social media has on prospective families researching the school. I mean, I want to say, I think it was, if I read it correctly, it was like 1% got their information from social media. It's really all websites, word of mouth, things, ratings, if they were to go to, like a boardingschoolreview.com or niche.com kind of thing. And, what were the ratings? What are parents saying? So really getting that presentation fixed up is much more important than, posting a bunch of stuff on social media. And some of the takeaways was you should really focus the social media more on a retention issue, because that's your community already involved as well. And, promoting different families and events through there keeps everyone engaged with the school community. So it's more of a retention issue. But yeah, I found that so interesting on where they were getting their research from.
And I think what's interesting as you talk about research, to understand that parents aren't a monolith, right? That there's that parents based in the U.S. Are going to lean in more maybe to a website, right? Where parents in Canada, we found, might have different things that they lean into more. Perhaps it's word of mouth or a family at the school who they know. Families outside the U.S. and Canada are much more likely to lean into the review sites, like you mentioned. Mm-hmm. And so understanding that, if you're a day school, say, and you don't have and the reason, Jesse, as I think about this, like, I've never met a independent school admissions or communications office that said, you know what, we just have too much time and too much resources. We don't know what to do with it all, right?
Yeah.
So schools have to make choices where they lean in. And, social media and the web are, those tools often are cheap or free, but the currency that you're paying with is time and focus, right? And so, like, two things I would say, the review sites for schools, if you're a day school and you don't have a large international population, there's not a homestay program, right? Then all of a sudden the value of the review sites is probably lower than a school that might have a boarding program or a large homestay program or a lot of families from overseas. Social media, let's say you're trying to juggle Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn, right? And you're really, from the report, you're saying, okay, well, look, for those things for admission, there actually isn't a huge, upside, like, or put it a different way, the focus of it might be a little bit lower. Like, I would say, you could jettison Twitter today. That's not where kids are. That's not going to be a retention tool for you. Right. Something like Instagram, absolutely where kids are, really valuable retention tool. LinkedIn, great place to keep those alumni engaged in the school, right? So it's all about focus and where you want to spend your most valuable resource, your staff's time. Right.
Yeah, and I think strategizing, what is the purpose of it? Like you said, if I'm trying to engage an alumni, let's focus a little bit on Facebook and LinkedIn, because that's where they're going to be professionally. They're going to be looking for networking. They're going to be looking for connection. Keep them involved. Current students, Instagram. They're going to be all. If you can do it, TikTok, but do it right for sure. Okay. You could do a lot of damage if you do it wrong, because it's never gone.
That's right. Yeah, and I mean, we just pulled some interesting data in our member community, actually looking at the top social network sites, and YouTube was actually right up there, which I think is super interesting. It sounds like Google finally got a social network. They've tried for a long time to build a social network, and they realized that YouTube is their. I mean, you could argue that's not a social network; it's a video sharing site, but there's a lot of opportunity there for schools with the content you might already have.
That's right. Yeah, I also found it interesting, how they are contacting the school. It was obviously the inquiry form is always a known fact. That's usually a first step. 17% of stealth applicants. I mean, everybody talks about the stealth applicant. 17% went straight to apply. The admissions office never even heard of these people before. And,
totally.
Kind of goes on to the importance of, what are you doing efficiently out there, because they're researching you, and what is day school versus boarding? Where are you focusing your energy and your time, like you were saying, and your focus, because that's going to matter. I mean, that number is probably only going to rise because we are a generation that is used to online anonymity and going through things with no one watching, and I'll make up my own mind as I go. And then when I'm ready, I'll reach out.
I think stealth apps can seem really confusing but when you look at it through the generational lens, it actually makes a lot of sense. And I'll give you an example of this that might help. So the last time I bought a car, so again, I'm Gen X. So one of the Gen X purchasing characteristics is that Gen X likes to research online but shop in person, particularly for expensive purchases. And so I understood stealth apps in a whole different way when the last time I bought a car. I did a massive amount of research online, but I walked into a dealer to buy the car. And what the dealer didn't understand was that I was a very qualified buyer for the car that I wanted, right? And
Right.
so, and dealers being dealers, they're like, oh, well, why don't I show you this car? Why don't I show you that car? Why don't I show you this? Oh, that one's not available. Dealer tricks. And I'm like, okay, like I really don't have time for these reindeer games. Like I want to buy the car that I want to buy. And so I actually chose a different dealer because I was a qualified buyer for the car that I was wanting to buy. And I think that's true of stealth app folks. Is when those stealth apps come in, it's not like they're applying willy-nilly, right? I think one of the common kind of misunderstandings is maybe stealth apps are caused by the rise of common application services, and I can just click a button and apply to 5 more schools, right? I don't think that's true. I think that actually comes from families researching online, and by the time they hit that apply button, they're actually qualified purchasers for your school's program because they've done the homework online before they've reached out.
Yeah, I would tend to agree, especially with my generation. Like I could totally see myself making a decision to at least apply. Accept me. Now I have a different conversation, and kind of where we were talking about earlier, my values change on what the reason is for going to this school. But absolutely, they could be probably some of your strongest applicants because of how much they've researched, and at least they've gotten to a place in the buyer cycle where they're ready to make this step. So that should be a huge and a strong lead for you to, reach out, get them on campus, show them, build up that value. And then, like we were saying earlier, engage them in ways that matter at this point of the process. We've already passed all of this. Don't go back. What are we going to be doing from here on out to get them to enroll?
And I think one of the things that came out in the report was that families, particularly in that situation that you're describing, really want personalized, customized outreach. So offering an open house for, a large group, particularly for that group, might not resonate. A personal call, personal email, opportunity to come for a tour, those kinds, connect with a teacher, connect with another family. Those kinds of things, that kind of personalized, customized outreach. Let me understand you. Let me find a family who would be a good fit for you to connect with. Right. There you go. Could really resonate.
Well, and kind of following the train of thought on that, it was in my old school we had a group, we had like a student-led group. It was we called them Eagle ambassadors, but they were for the admissions department, and they would go on these tours. We thought it was a good idea, and they would basically give the tour with the family, and then the family would come back, and then the admissions representative would answer any questions the kids might not be able to be involved in. And that process worked well. I mean, the families really liked that. Now you're seeing data from this report that's showing just that. The student experience was even more important than the current parent experience. And having that involvement was so interesting,
Yeah, and the risk of getting that wrong, either by not having a student tour guide or having the wrong fit, I think it just speaks to that desire for authenticity. I expect the head of school and the admission director to say nice things about the school. A student, they're going to, of course, I know they're a part of the student tour guide club, but on the other hand, I can have a different kind of experience with that student. I really understand, can I see myself here? Is there folks like me, or who, is this a kind of student like my child? And I think that, the opportunity there, I've seen a couple of really fun things that schools are doing in the online space. So for example, and I think this will be important as we go into the back half of, into rolling admissions. Not all schools are having folks onto campus or even into next year. A couple of examples. I attended an open house that opened with a student music performance rather than an adult speaking. really cool opportunity to let the student voice come through. I
Right.
attended a admission yield event that was a student live news, like, the student TV show.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was, it was like it was a yield event for admitted families that was just only students doing their student news show. Really cool. I've seen student panels, of course. Something I've seen from a lot of schools now is starting to do alumni panels as a part of admissions events, right? Alumni can't get to campus easily, but they're happy to hop on a Zoom call and be on a panel. And like, wow, how authentic is that? You don't have to make me believe that your school will have a powerful impact on my child. You can show me that your
Right.
school is having a powerful impact on my child. But look, here are our alumni. Here are their stories. Here's where they are and what they're doing. And so really neat opportunities.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point because it's like, hey, this is how I was prepared for where I am today because I went here.
Yeah,
And,
right.
and really just making that comparison directly. Here
Yeah.
are some classmates that weren't prepared because they didn't go here.
Yeah.
And
when I got to college, I was ready and my roommate wasn't. Like, you don't have to now. All of this, you don't have to like make me believe that your academics program is strong. Blah, like, wow, because I saw Susie tell this story. I'm
Right.
blown away. I want my daughter to be like Susie. Wow, that's cool.
Yeah, interesting. Another piece of the study that had some good facts, and I don't think it's anything shocking, but the financial aid piece.
Yeah.
How parents were interacting with financial aid. I do think that the shocking thing to me was the percentages dropped. When there's such a big conversation about resetting tuitions, because we're pricing ourselves out of the market in so many different areas. But on the other end, this study showing that people are applying for it less and less. So, what are we really seeing here?
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. And honestly, this was there's some parts of the survey where we look at it and we go, oh yeah, okay, that totally makes sense. Kind of expecting it, right? There's some parts of the survey where we're like, didn't expect that, but we can see why, like, with the generational stuff. And then this was probably the one thing where I look at that and I'm like, what on earth is going on here? And I think a couple of things. I think there are certainly some people who wouldn't qualify for financial aid who are correctly ruling themselves out, right? So they're saying, I bet I won't qualify for aid. I won't apply. Great. I think, though, that there are a lot of folks who might be tuition capable, right, who might benefit from aid, who are ruling themselves out of the aid process and maybe out of the application process altogether.
Mm-hmm.
And we actually have some supporting data on this outside of the survey that's interesting. I can touch on that briefly. So EMA operates the SSAT, which is an assessment for kids applying to independent schools. And an important thing for us is that everybody who needs to or wants to take the SSAT can. So we actually give away free tests to anybody who needs to, who can't afford to take the test, right? And when we pivoted to an at-home version of the test, we actually mailed kids computers at home. So if you said, I can't afford the test and I don't have a computer to take the test, we'll give you the test for free and we'll mail you a computer.
Wow.
Right? And it's somewhere around $800,000 in free assessments that we give out every year. But this year, and so we call that the fee waiver program. So this year, and this was concerning, fee waivers as a percent of the overall assessment declined. So even though there was less testing this year, there was fewer SSAT assessments this year, the percent of fee waivers declined disproportionately. So in other words, poor families are being disproportionately affected by the COVID-19 crisis, which is something we knew outside of independent schools, but we didn't have data to see that inside independent schools until now. And so I think two things. One, there are families who are tuition capable, who could benefit from aid, who are losing. And that's on us to find those kids and to get them back into our pipeline. I think the second thing that's happening is that financial aid is a lousy term. I think the opportunity, and we're seeing some schools move to a family fit tuition or index tuition, right? All kinds of different programs and names and communication around this. There's some opportunities there. And I'll leave you with one quick example on this. When I used to work with schools around their websites, we would look at what are the top 2 or 3 most visited pages on your website. Of course, the homepage was usually the most visited page, but often in slot 2 or 3 was the tuition page, right? And so what I ask schools to do a lot is to give as much love and attention to the tuition page as you do to the homepage, to make that an opportunity to communicate your beliefs and values around affordability, how you work with families, how much aid you have available, what the process is. Even if you're not going to change your pricing structure or move to an index tuition or a best fit tuition, you're still going to call it financial aid. You can use your financial aid page as an opportunity to not just list the pricing or not just list the, fill out this form or
Right.
But actually to communicate something central to who you are and what you believe.
And that's a key advice to give to any school. I mean, especially with the changing demographic of this new families that's coming in. This is a perfect opportunity, like you said, not even to change your tuition amount, but let's give some stats on what we're investing in.
Yes.
Here X, we invest this much money into this because we feel that this is important, X, blah, blah, blah. We invest in this. Your price is still there, but you're giving all of the value proposition, along that same page. And, interestingly enough, when you do a lot of Google Analytics, a lot of times that's the page they leave on too.
Yes.
Trying to keep them involved.
Right. Why?
You want to make that a more engaging place. But it is a perfect place to really add that value proposition. What is the school focused and how do they spend this money? How is it going to benefit my child? That's an interesting point. I think that they should spend some time diving into that and making it as great as the homepage or any other page for that matter. Yeah,
that's it exactly. And I love how you called out specifically understanding the family and the child. I mean, I think it's an easy thing to say, well, why should I pay for something that I can get for free from my local public? But when you hear a different narrative, like how could I not pay for someone who's going to understand my child, who's going to align with our values, who's going to demonstrate daily practice that's going to result in outcomes for our family and for our child, who's going to solve a problem for our family that we can't solve any other way, who's going to be our partner in parenting our child, who's going to ensure that there are outcomes on the other end. Like, how could I not invest in my child's future, right? And all of a sudden you've just absolutely flipped the script, and that's really powerful.
And that was, a key piece we've talked about, with our clients and any other guests that we've had here. It's they got kind of, we called it the COVID boom, that July rush. Depending on what was happening in their local governments or state governments and how the public schools were opening or whatever their trust was, they got this boom. How do you keep them? You got to build that. And, what we kept saying and what a lot of other people are saying is make it to where they feel so involved in the community now that they can't, why would I go back? I can't not do this. That's the other proposition. I can't not have this kind of attention anymore. He's grown or she's grown so much because of this. I can't imagine not having that, and making it the proposition where I can't leave because it's what is the cost of leaving versus staying? And it's not a numerical value. So.
Yes, no, I think that's spot on. And I think that, oftentimes I see that there needs to be a bridge there to help interpret for families the experience of their child, right? So here's how I'll give you an example. One thing I often ask schools to do is to use the word because, right? So just to take the things you're already doing, add the because on the end. So for example, you came to our school because we had small classes. Yes, true. Because we believe through our small classes that we can do these things, right? You came to us because we were in person, unlike your whatever school you were before that was online, right? We believe that in-person learning is important because of these things that are irreplaceable to the student-teacher experience, right? Like helping families interpret the value of the school, I think is really important. And that's like one, just put that word because on there and it like automatically turns the future into a benefit, right? Like it's not just that you are in person, because if public school goes back to in person, then they can get in person somewhere else.
Right.
But your because is critical to who you are, and they can't possibly give that up, right?
I think that schools need to start like the because campaigns. And they do a different because, and they post it to social media and to their community. Because this, boom, there's a whole article about it.
Yeah, that's right.
Really
And the
showcase
cool thing
themselves.
is, like, as schools try to think about what's differentiating,
Yep.
right? I mean, schools struggle to figure that out, right? But and school X, Y, and Z all have small classes, or all are in person, or all have science buildings, or all have math. But a school's because is different. Each school is going to
That's
believe
right.
something different about why they have a small classes, why they're important, what the value of that is. Is it, do we have small classes because we want every single child to be rigorously challenged so they can go on to, high level math? Or do we believe in every single child having a small experience where every child is known and cared for and can grow as a human, right? Or is it because we need to catch folks up? Here's a real opportunity for schools, I think, is families have seen that their child might have an education gap from the
Yep.
last 12 months, right? Which is really, right, a school year and a half, really, right? By
Mhm.
the time folks come back in person. And so there's a lot of families right now who are saying, help me catch my child back up, either socially because they've been behind a computer for a long time, or academically because we have aspirations for the next level, but they're not ready because they missed reading and because they're in
Yep.
kindergarten and they didn't get the reading that they need, or math because they want to play football in college and need to qualify for a D1 school, right? So, like, what's the gap that families are feeling? Families feel gaps. I predict that there'll be a lot of summer camps this summer, if it's safe to do so, that focus is either on academic catch up,
Mhm.
or like, hey, we're going to be together and just get that, like, oh, we're together thing going again.
Right.
So that when you hit the fall, you're like,
It's not
you've
such a
been around
shock.
other humans. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, exactly. You got to deal with the emotions of high school drama in person all over again. Like
yeah. And like,
let's
let's
start that
get
back up over a summer camp. Have some fun with it.
exactly. You
So,
got it.
in the report, did you find anything that was really surprising? Like you just kind of
Mm.
you read this and it was like, oh wow, that I wasn't expecting.
Yeah, we talked about financial aid. That was probably one of the big ones. The generational shift we've already talked about. That also, there's some micro things too, like school fairs, being families really being interested in those again, which was surprising because that was sort of the opposite of what we found 3 years ago. And I don't know if I read from that we should all get our trifold, displays and get in the school gym and do in-person school fairs. But I think what I take from that is that families want opportunities to engage, and they want opportunities to engage in a way that works for them. And so I think,
Right.
particularly in the back half of the year, families actually, took advantage of those online opportunities that schools made available. We really have to call out the increased importance from families in a variety of different ways of talking about diversity. Families
Yep.
expect schools to be diverse communities. That came, like, that flipped, like, reputation became less important and diversity became more important. And so we looked at racial diversity, socioeconomic diversity, diversity of languages spoken, political views, and families are really saying, this is something that we care about, and
Hmm.
we're going to seek out environments where our child can be across all of those different verticals, all those different areas, not just racial, which I think is important to point out, but that, although that is one of them for sure, that families are saying, this is something we care about. We expect you, school, to have an intentional program
Absolutely.
in this regard.
Well, they want their kids to experience that. I mean, I was fortunate enough. I went to an independent school that was an international boarding school. I had roommates from all over the world, and some of them I visited their
Yes,
homes. I got to
yes.
have that experience. And you can't learn that kind of thing in a textbook. And your generation, my generation, we're globalized. This was our life. We were in this globalized world, so it's an
Right.
expectation that our kids are going to be equipped with that. They want them to, I want my children to learn different languages. I want them to experience different cultures. I want them to
Yes.
be worldly, because to me, it's essential. If I'm trying to give them the skills to succeed in the future, how can I not have diversity and being exposed to that? as a top priority. I mean,
That's right.
it's just how I think naturally. How could I not think in a globalized way?
Yeah, and I think the really important thing that we also have to acknowledge is that not all families feel welcome at all schools, right?
That's right.
And I think the Black Hat Instagram accounts have shown us something that we should have already seen. And so the opportunity for us to truly intentionally create schools that are welcoming to Black kids, to brown kids, to gay kids, to straight kids, to kids from other countries, to rich kids and poor kids. I truly believe that independent schools are welcoming, caring places. And independent schools need to be intentionally
Yep.
anti-biased so that value is true for every kind of kid and every kind of family. And that came out loud and clear in the report.
That's right. You're absolutely right about that. And they do have to be quite intentional because, for better or for worse, I guess for worse for now, many of these schools, they were founded based on, socioeconomic issues. And that obviously biased towards one side, that favored one side over another. So, their foundational beginnings came from a segregationist type of mentality, whether they tried to or not. Private schools is what it is, especially in some of your more southern states, and changing that culture over time, changing that accessibility over time. Now we've got to be intentional. We've got to really jumpstart that so that schools can really open up to everyone in the environment, and that might be a cultural shift from its beginnings. There's plenty of schools that weren't diverse at all. Just as early as maybe 20 or so years ago. And now they're trying to get on that trend. It's changing the value of independent school learning and what you can get from it, which I think is a good thing overall.
Yeah, and separate from your school's history, right, or your school's founding, we sit in a broader context. I'll give you an example from the report that might illustrate this. So we asked international families what concerns them about sending their child to study in an independent school in the U.S. And the top concern was fear of racism or bullying, right? The second was safety overall. And so I think for that kind of family, but that should apply to more broadly all families, to a family who's concerned about racism or bullying, to say, well, we'll make sure that racism or bullying doesn't happen because we're a welcoming community, right? That's not as intentional as
Right.
I think a family would like, because you wouldn't say the same thing, about any other program at your school, right? So if you care about academics, you wouldn't say like, well, how can you ensure that my child will have a great academic experience? And you say, well, we have a very academically oriented culture, so
That's right.
that'll be fine. And so I think families would expect, and schools should provide, an intentional program that would align with the concerns of families and the goals of the school. To say, yeah, I think a more authentic answer would be to say, our school sits in a context and we can't prevent every incident of bullying. Here's how we intentionally work to prevent that, and here's what happens when that occurs, right? Should that occur?
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
I think that's the more
and
authentic.
How do we celebrate diversity? Like, we make intentional purposes to celebrate different cultures, and we have this event and we do these things and this kind of knowledge sharing. So we
have a Gay Straight Alliance, we have a diverse faculty, right? There's a lot of different intentional, really programmatic, mission aligned things that you can do.
That's awesome. Again, the report was, that was a very 30,000 foot view of that report. There's, if you haven't seen it, definitely go check it out. It's 72 pages of tons of insights. So, it was great. I really appreciate you talking a lot about it with me today and with our audience.
You bet. Yeah, it's available to members in our member community. And there's a digest version for folks who aren't members at learn.enrollment.org.
Excellent. Usually we have guests, obviously they're directors of admissions or deans of admissions,
Sure.
and we talk about their region a little bit, but, considering your region is everyone, and this might be really good to get, I don't know if you have a Canadian perspective or international perspective compared to American perspective, but, what are your members seeing with enrollment this year? Particularly anything insightful or new?
For sure. So, and again, we should clarify the Rise to Independent School report was done last summer, but didn't really capture that late surge that you talked about or the enrollment trends that schools are facing right now. I mean, I think I'll give you a couple of different insights there. The first thing I would say is that we're still very much in a disrupted enrollment
That's right. Yeah.
Picture. So, we have to acknowledge that these were families who began the admission process as COVID was in full force and, may have had limited or even no access to be able to come on campus. So we're still very much in a disrupted picture. The second thing I would say is that the biggest trend that I think I've seen is that there's no one trend. So, it's going to, for schools not in the US, it's going to vary widely on how the country has handled the COVID-19 crisis, the ability for family or industry to move in and out of countries. We were talking to some member schools recently in Vietnam. They had, I think, 3 cases. And so the whole country shut down, right? Obviously a very different picture than in another country in Europe or in the United States.
Right.
The other thing I would say is the retention. To your point, we did see a lot of families see an influx. We saw a lot of schools with an influx of families late in the enrollment cycle. Those folks fleeing to quality, the public school switchers.
Yeah.
And so, a lot of folks are really asking some really great questions. How do we keep all the families that we have? How do we prove out our value and make sure that we keep all those families? That's why we're actually offering an online retention symposium later this month. We can talk more about that if you want. But then I would say, domestically here overall, we're seeing that applications are down year over year. So schools overall are seeing apps down. That's largely being driven by international families, fewer of them applying to schools in the US.
Mm-hmm.
There are a couple of bright spots. For example, the number of schools seeing postgraduate applicants who have a postgraduate program, so that, year after 12th grade, those numbers are through the roof. So if you have a postgraduate program or you're considering some kind of credit remediation or credit catch-up program, there's a lot of demand for that right now. And why? Well, we talked about it earlier, right?
Yeah, that lost year. Yep.
Yeah, that's right. So that's a couple of overviews. I mean, we talked to schools in Southern California. There's families moving out. They're seeing a net negative population, outflow. That's a real problem. Then we're seeing schools in rural areas that have struggled with, population. All of a sudden, you can't buy a house.
That's right.
You can't buy a house. I'm in New Hampshire, and houses will go on the market and sell sight unseen in 12 hours. Right? There's remote work is definitely having a impact on families. Want to get some quality of life, get out of the city, and that's going to have some impact. On some schools that aren't nearby.
No, that's absolutely true. Every rural and urban school that we've talked to, no matter where they were, it seems to be this migration from urban to rural. Obviously, the pandemic probably had a lot to do with that. Just as far as physically being around people, or the lockdown that they had to go into because there were so many people around. But remote work, I mean, that's changing everything, especially the way businesses are doing things. And if I can move to a place that's going to be more suitable, like you said, and still get everything done that I need to professionally, I mean, why wouldn't I? It's cheaper, it's more spacious. You know what I mean? You'll miss some things from the city, but that's they move to the city for work, and if they can get that from outside the city, they'll move back out. So that's definitely a good trend that's going around, or not good, but a trend that's going around. And
we're seeing one of the strategies I've seen a number of schools use is to reach out to real estate agents. If you can have a reception on campus, invite real estate agents. If you are seeing this kind of influx of families, reaching out to real estate agents either in an in-person reception or an online reception to just make sure that they know about the school as they're introducing families to the area. That can be a way to
Excellent idea.
get traction.
Yeah, excellent idea. So, we kind of alluded to it a little bit, but, I'd like to finalize everything with, what are some plans? I know we're kind of on the tail end of, we're not in the clear yet, but, with vaccinations rolling out left and right,
Yes.
by summer we see the light of day, or at least the president's giving us the light of day for the summertime. So, what does that mean for, your events, fairs? What does that mean for you guys post-COVID?
For sure. So for the near term, we're all online still. So our next event is our retention symposium. That's on March 23rd. That's one price for your whole school, and it's all focused around retention. We go then into a April-May regional event series, and we call them regional even though they're online, but those will be content and research and data for folks around the US, Canada, and overseas. So that's an online event series. Both of those are up on our website, enrollment.org/events. Summer, for now, we're still thinking those will be, our summer events will still be online. And then the fall, we're looking ahead to the annual conference, and TBD on that one. I'll keep you posted as that changes hour by hour. But we'll definitely have an annual conference, certainly online, and we're working out what that hybrid, what that would look like. So
you got to have two committees, one focused on, in person and one focused on online, and whichever is more reliable, you just got to go with at that time. Make the call. That's going to be a late.
Like schools in a lot of ways. So, schools are in the same boat. So, but I think it's overall great news that more folks are getting vaccinated. And I know there'll be a lot of pent up demand to see each other when it's safe to do that.
Absolutely. Definitely. So finally, like to close, what do you think the biggest opportunity enrollment is this year?
I think that families have seen what school looks like because it happened in their dining rooms. So they see what schools look like, and families really are feeling pain. Families are feeling a variety of different kinds of pain points, either educationally for their child, perhaps they're moving, perhaps have lost work. And so families have both understand what their child needs and seen what school looks like in a different way. And so the opportunities enrollment-wise for schools to really understand what families need and either communicate the programs that they already have to serve them or develop new programs to serve them. There's a lot of upside for schools who can do either of those two things.
Yeah, I would agree wholeheartedly. And definitely, when we talk about trying to monetize, sometimes value, when someone's on the dining room table trying to go through school, and it's like, okay, well, maybe this investment in their education's not so crazy after all. I've seen firsthand what it could be like if they didn't. And, they're giving independent schools a different look. That's for sure. And, if you can communicate properly, that's a huge win for you. Yeah.
Right. And we know what we care about as a family. And, and I think, more broadly, not even regarding school, but I think, this whole moment has just said, what do we really care about as a family? Right. What's really important to us, and finding a school that can align with that is a huge opportunity for schools.
That's great. Well, I really appreciate the time. We've gone through a lot of topics today, a lot of discussion on the Ride to Independent Schools report from EMA. It was a great report. I really appreciate you taking the time to go through it with us. I wish you nothing but the best up in New Hampshire. I hope it gets warm soon and you can start enjoying, the outdoors a little bit as we all get vaccinated. So thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
Thanks so much, Jesse. Happy to be here. Thanks for the opportunity.
Awesome. Well, that'll do it for us today. I hope you grabbed some great insights. Once again, go to the enrollment.org website. You can see all the latest events, trends, and reports that you can get. I hope that you can see this entire episode on schoolcraftdigital.com. The audio version will be available on Buzzsprout, our social media sites, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your local audio podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you next week.